So let's start with a photo to do a little bit of a review of just some basic functions in Photoshop, since it's been a while since we've played with it. And the Photoshop that we're currently working with is probably a little newer than the one you may have used a year ago or 2 years ago. So I brought this picture in, and this photograph is image size. Let's look at it. It's just over 13 square, and it's a resolution of 72. And again, I found this by searching large. I typed in kids with hats and found this picture to use as my sample to kind of play with as an opportunity to kind of show you some of these different functions we haven't done for a while. In my other video, if you haven't watched it, I showed you how you could crop a photo smaller to kind of raise its resolution a little bit, because I don't need this child's picture to be 13 by 13. That's pretty big. And if I'm going to incorporate this into another document that's going to be a little smaller, then I would probably need this child and the hat to be smaller. So since it's a perfect square right now, I'm just going to say let's crop it to like 5 by 5. Okay, so it's going to go from 13 by 13 plus to 5 by 5. And what that's going to do is that's going to compress and push all the pixels closer together on all their sides. And once I hit enter, okay, we can go back up to image size now that it's smaller, 5 by 5. And look what it did. By compressing and moving all those pixels in a lot closer, we now are no longer 72 dpi, but we're at 200 dpi. So we have a significant increase in our quality. All right. So now let's look at some of the selection tools so we can kind of rehash or remind ourselves of some of those. So I'm going to click on the quick selection tool. And if I'm trying to extract this girl out of the background for some work on her, then what I'm going to want to do is twofold. One, I'm going to come down here to the background area and I'm going to double click it to unlock it. Okay, I could even delete this background if I wanted to, because we don't really need anything behind this. And in fact, it would be helpful for me to kind of see when we remove something that it's gone. Remember, that's when you're going to see the little checkerboard pattern. But for us, instead of selecting her, since she happens to be on a nice white background, which is always useful if somebody's on more of a solid background, it would be helpful to kind of just remove the background, wouldn't it? All right, so I'm going to use my quick selection tool here, and this is going to zip around a lot of the main areas that I want to get of hers. No, oh, look at that. It just chose too much. Why? Because my selection tool is still a little bit broad. So if you need to unselect, if it went too far, hold down your Alt key or your Option key if you're in the world of Mac. All right, so now it kind of put everybody back. For me to get this little sliver, I need to make this tool smaller. So that's where the bracket tools right next to the letter P can make things smaller or bigger. So I'm going to come in there, and then you can see I'm going to have to use my Alt key to kind of train it or push it to go back where I want it to, so it doesn't take what I don't want, but that it kind of gets more in the entirety of what I do want. And we might need to, we'll finesse it a little bit and maybe come in a little bit more with an eraser tool, because the eraser tool can start to get into some tinier areas. All right, I'm going to enlarge it back again and kind of grab some of this big area over here. And it starts to grab some more of what we want here. And again, it's going a little too far in some areas, so I'll need to kind of bop back out here with the Alt key to train it to go out to the outer edge. It typically is going to, in general, look for a difference in pixel values. All right, and it will snap up against what tends to be the highest contrast area of colors. All right, this will need to be kind of cleaned up a little bit later. But I could now take this and hit the delete key, and you can see how it's gone away. The other thing that we could do, depending on where you're going to go next, is you could end up, instead of doing that, I could have gone up here and said, select the inverse, which means select the opposite. Because right now the background is selected. If I just wanted to select her and move her somewhere, I could say select the inverse, and now see she is selected, not the background. So there's two different, approaches to this, okay? I'm going to go for the let's delete what we've got. Control D gets rid of your selection. All right, and I'm going to now do a little zoom in here because we've got some areas probably around the shirt area. Let's see if there's anything. See how there's a little bit of white kind of left along here? Let's come along here with our eraser tool. And eraser tools is a brush, just like anything else is. And if you want there to be sort of a nice hard edge or a stopping point, you'd want to take this up to 100 so that the edge would be very crisp and sharp. If you want something to blend in, you would want it to be a little less, and you would take the hardness away from the brush. We're somewhere kind of in the hard category. I don't necessarily want to make a super hard and then make a big cutout or chunk in it. So I'm going to leave it at this right now, and I'm going to shrink my, there we go. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit so I can get rid of more of this leftover white goodness, okay? I'm holding down and clicking occasionally to get rid of some of the excess white that was hanging out there, right? So traveling around your figure and seeing if there's anything that's still kind of left over, any residue that's still there from our white outline, so that it's not there when we actually go to travel it over to our document. Something that you can do, had I not gotten completely rid of our background, let me add another layer here, and we'll drag that to the bottom. We know we could always come over to the gradient tool, and underneath the gradient tool, there's the paint bucket tool, and we could take any color we want. Let's do a blue color or something here, and I could go Kerplush, and I could put that in there temporarily, and it would show us any of the leftover white areas or the background discolorations that are maybe still attached to her. And we can see that they're in some of these areas still. Oops, I went a little too far here. That they're still in some of these little areas over here. So that means I still need to come back on that layer of her and play with my, my eraser tool just a little bit more to kind of tap in and get rid of some more of, and I can shrink the brush to do that, to get rid of a little bit more of that white background that we sort of had left behind, okay? You can change your brush size. Again, to get into some of these little nooks and crannies, you're going to need to kind of go smaller, all right, to alleviate and to erase. You do want to make sure that you're set on 100%, if that's something you're trying to completely get rid of. If I was fading out, I would have maybe more of a transparency going on, but we're sitting here trying to get rid of all of that leftover white from some of these areas before we transfer her over. Okay, so that's one of those little detail things you'll kind of have to work on. The other thing that folks wanted to have a reminder on was on actually working with color change. So let me drag her back over here. We can turn off our background there, and let's just look at her and any kind of color adjustments. Color adjustments are down in this half and half cookie icon down here. It's a sort of a yin yang. I'm going to turn that on, and we come up to the first thing I normally try and work with are levels. Levels is the dark and light of a color, or the grays in the picture. And you will notice that there's not as many blacks over here, and there's a little less in the white. So I'm going to push the blacks up just a little bit to get a little bit more richness. I'm going to push just a little bit of the whites to brighten her. And now we kind of have a nice balance. Sometimes if your picture is too gray, you may have to adjust the grays in the picture, but her grays seem to be pretty good. I'm going to take those back to where they were before, okay? Let's see. Oh, I just went back too far. There we go. Let me bump that back in. Let me bump that back. Okay, so now where we are. Another thing to complete or fix pictures, some people want to change the colors and add a different kind of color or a heightened change to things. If you want to put a mood or a feeling on a picture, like we've done in movie posters and things before, this is where you want to choose hue and saturation. I'm choosing it from up here because my adjustments panel popped open when I clicked down here, but I can click down here and choose it from there as well. Again, hue and saturation. Hue means a color. Saturation means how much of that color. So right now, master is chosen, which means this goes flying through all different kinds of saturation of being either black and white or in more intense red, because red is the color that's primarily in the picture right now. I could randomly just roll through a whole bunch of color changes, and it changes from the color spectrum that's laid out here, but it affects everything in the picture, right? Or if there's a certain color individually I'd like to change, say I'd like to change something about the reds in the picture, or specifically I could go in and say, these reds I'd like to change, and maybe I could change those by adding a little bit more intensity to them, or I could lighten them a little bit. All right, and notice how it changes all the reds in the picture. And since she has reds in her skin tones, it's affecting that as well. All right, I could, if I wanted to, use the a selection tool, all right, and only select the objects that I want to have changes on so that the rest of the picture isn't affected. It kind of masks things out. The other thing that you can do is hit colorize. If I want to set an overall mood on the whole thing, the whole picture, including the black areas, look how the black area is going to turn to this blue-violet kind of color, because right now I'm hovering over a blue. I can do what's called a monochromatic picture. I'm then changing this entire photograph into like a tinted image of just one color. So if you want to set a mood and just have the object or the photograph be all of one color and all of its lights and darks, this is monochromatic. All right. I could bump the orange. I could bump the richness or the darkness of the picture, the lightness if I wanted to be more transparent. So you have these kinds of flexibilities within your color changes. And again, reminder, all of these happen on layers above the original photo, right? So nothing has to be permanent. I could take this off if I decided I didn't want it and just leave it with the brightness and the darkness contrast of the grays. Or I could take that away and just have this. So you build on with your adjustment levels. All right. As I spoke earlier, we could just select an area of her that we'd like to highlight. So let me come back over here to her and let's play with a selection. I'm going to reduce this just a little bit here. Let's see if we can get her band. And we got a little too much extra that we didn't need. We want to come down here. I want to get rid of all of that junk. We want to get rid of all of this. We want to get rid of her hair in there. We want just her necklace. Okay. Let's see how we're just selected there. Now that I have selected just that one item, I'm going to come up here to Image Adjustments. So this is going to be more permanent. It's going to be on the photo itself because I've chosen those pixels right there. Okay, so I'm going to come up and do Hue and Saturation here, and this is where I can choose if I want that necklace to be a different color. I could play with certain colors, or I can just choose to colorize it and look how it changes along my spectrum here. Maybe I want it to be a complementary color or something. Again, I can push how much of the the value. I can make it a little darker and richer. I can push it a little bit more. And there she has been changed, so that is its color. Now I did that really fast, so my detailing, I would have come in closer and zoomed in as I was doing that so that I could get the actual closeness, and that way I wouldn't accidentally get part of her skin in the process. But that again is another version of playing with color adjustments.